Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my favorite picks for our upcoming 2024 fantasy football drafts. Now, over the course of the last couple days, I've talked about potential league winners and, of course, sleepers for the 2024 fantasy football season. But I also want to talk about players who I often find myself drafting more often than not as I approach my own 2024 fantasy football leagues. So I'm going to be talking about players at a variety of different positions, players who I believe you should be targeting going into this upcoming season. Now, before I talk about Josh Jacobs as the first suggestion, a couple reminders: if you guys have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We are on our way to 100,000 subscribers. Again, making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2024 season with the singular goal of trying to help you capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. Additionally, if you guys want more content such as my 2024 fantasy football draft guide and rankings so that you can have an advantage upon your league mates, go down in the description, either sign up via Underdog Fantasy and of course, or check out the Patreon. All of the information and of course links are down in the description. We'll talk about that more in just a moment, but thank you very much for all the support. So let's talk about the potential must draft prospect of Josh Jacobs as he joins a new organization. Now, over the course of the last 5 seasons, as a member of the Raiders, of course, we've seen him find a lot of success, whether it's in the running game and or as a receiving back. But as he approaches the 2024 year with a new organization and a new team completely surrounding him, this, in my opinion, is the best team that he has played on throughout his entire career. Yes, he played on a 2021 Las Vegas Raiders who went to the playoffs, lost in the wild card to the Cincinnati Bengals, if I'm not mistaken. Derek Carr threw an interception late in that game to seal the deal. But going into this upcoming year, I think there's a lot of potential considering what he has accomplished and what the Green Bay Packers organization has done to support their running backs. Now, when we talk about the accomplishments of Josh Jacobs, it was just a couple years back in 2022 where he put up incredible numbers, 17.75 fantasy points per game on average. He was number 4 amongst all running backs within that overall category. I mean, from weeks 1 through 18 was the number 3 overall back in a half PPR scoring format within that season. And when you look at all of his seasons throughout his career, he's found himself a lot of success. 2021 from weeks 4 through 18 was the number 7 overall back. 2020 from weeks 1 through 17 was the number 8 overall back. His rookie season 2019 from weeks 1 through 15, the number 11 overall back. And most recently this last season from weeks 1 through 14, the number 11 overall back as well. But when we talk about his fantasy point per game production over the course of the last 5 years, yes, it has fluctuated going from number 14, 13, 18, 4, and 18 in terms of amongst all running backs, his point per game averages in a half PPR scoring format. You have to take into account that he has been on the field more often than not. And with so many other running backs dealing with injuries, he's always been able to keep himself within the top 12 conversation. And going into this upcoming season, I expect that to continue. So when we talk about, of course, the struggles that Josh Jacobs had last season and his inefficiencies, obviously because he was dealing with the contract negotiations, obviously late in the season, after week 14, didn't play within the organization primarily because he knew, all right, I'm not going to re-sign with this organization. Why do I want to go put my body on the line if I'm not going to be playing for the Raiders next year? So with all of the contract negotiation issues that he had last season leading to his inefficiencies, he was still rewarded and given a massive contract this offseason. Of course, 4 years, $48 million. And at the running back position, over the course of the last couple seasons, we haven't seen running backs consistently get over $10 million per year on average within their contracts. But Josh Jacobs, of course, has done enough in his career to prove that he deserves it. I mean, in 2023, when you gave him ample opportunity, 17 plus touches per game or more, I mean, the guy was averaging 15.44 fantasy points per game. In games in which he played 75% of the snaps or more, nearly averaging 14 fantasy points per game. So he's done enough. And going into the Green Bay Packers organization, of course, with guys like Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon who were supported within this offense over the course of the last couple of years, we know that the Green Bay Packers want to heavily utilize the running back position. Aaron Jones has been supported and ranked as the number 2, 5, 12, and 9 overall running back over the course of the 2019 to 2022 season. And even though Aaron Jones dealt with a lot of injuries last season and wasn't able to rank within the top 36, we know that the running back position has been heavily supported, primarily because from 2021 to 2023, the Green Bay Packers have been number 7 in terms of overall running back rushing attempts, number 15 in running back targets, and number 8 in terms of total opportunities to their running backs, a total of course, their attempts and targets combined. And when you take it even a step further, in terms of not just opportunities in general, but the most valuable opportunities to running backs, I'm talking about red zone rushing attempts. Last season, amongst all teams, the Green Bay Packers ranked number 5 in terms of red zone rushing attempts for their running backs. Now, going into this year, we have just heard some recent information regarding A.J. Dillon having a season-ending injured reserve stint now due to a neck injury, which is obviously unfortunate, but in the case of Josh Jacobs, it makes him that much more potentially valuable. His only backfield competition resides in rookie running back Marshawn Lloyd, who has been dealing with an injury all training camp. And going into this year, Josh Jacobs should immediately be the workhorse back of the team. And when I talk about workhorse backs, yes, I'm talking about 20 plus touches per game on average over the course of the season. We have seen him in 2021 and in 2022, both of those years, handle a minimum of 53 receptions, both of those seasons, in which he had over 60 overall targets. So as long as you give him opportunity, he is going to deliver. He is a veteran in this league. And in comparison to the rest of the offensive pieces within the Green Bay Packers offense, he is the leader. He is the veteran. He has the most experience amongst all. And considering how young they are, they certainly need that experience. And going into this upcoming season, considering his ADP on ESPN is sitting at 40, I mean, that is a perfect position for me to invest in a running back of this caliber who I anticipate to once again be top 12 at the position. Now, before we continue, if you guys want more information regarding these kind of players, how I approach my drafts, and of course the rankings that I utilize for my upcoming drafts, you can go ahead and travel down to the description and get your hands on my 2024 fantasy football draft guide by either traveling on over to Underdog Fantasy or Patreon. If you guys sign up today via Underdog Fantasy, using code Andrew and making a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, you'll get my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, the associated rankings, which is by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings at all positions, including kicker and defense, and of course has flex rankings. But the rankings won't stop there. I'll also continue to send you, emails every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season because, again, like I mentioned before, I want to help you capture a 2024 fantasy football championship. So if you guys are interested, of course, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your current eligibility based on your location. If you are not eligible or you have signed up in the past using my code or somebody else's code, you can also check out Patreon. All the information is down there. We're offering all of this and much more available on Patreon. Thank you very much for the support. Okay, so let's talk about another player that I love drafting. One of my favorite draft picks this season is Garrett Wilson. And he was one of my favorite draft picks last season. I thought that he was going to be a league winner, but unfortunately the injury to Aaron Rodgers really did set him back major. Now, going into this year with a healthy Aaron Rodgers and majority of us having an opportunity of selecting Garrett Wilson at the back end of the first round, again, if you have a back end of the first round selection and you're outside of the top, 8 overall players, I'm talking about the top 3 running backs and the top 5 wide receivers that are consensus. If you don't have an opportunity of getting one of those players, getting Garrett Wilson on roster really is going to give you an opportunity to potentially get into that top 5 conversation, considering what kind of opportunity and, of course, production he is going to put forth this upcoming season. Now, even though over the course of the last 2 years, Garrett Wilson has not had great quarterback play with Zach Wilson. He has still managed to rank as a top 36 wide receiver in both of those years. To put into perspective just how bad Zach Wilson has been over the course of the last couple seasons, in the last 2 years, Garrett Wilson has totaled 315 total targets. That is third all-time amongst all receivers in terms of total targets that they have had within the first 2 seasons of their NFL career. I mean, again, third all-time, ridiculous numbers. But when we take into account that in 2022, 36% of his targets were deemed uncatchable, and in 2023, 32% of his targets were deemed uncatchable. When you take into account, yes, 315 total targets, fantastic, but there's 107 of those that were deemed uncatchable within those overall years. So even though his catch rate over the course of the last 2 seasons consists of a 56.5% catch rate, the real number is 208 total eligible targets, 178 receptions for a 85.6% catch rate. When you send an accurate pass in the direction of Garrett Wilson, of course, you're going to find success. And what does he get this upcoming season? One of the most accurate quarterbacks in NFL history in Aaron Rodgers. A quarterback who's been able to elevate his wide receivers from 2008 to 2022 and will continue this in 2024. I mean, whenever Garrett Wilson has had mediocre quarterback play, I'm talking about 2022 in games in which he has had either Joe Flacco or Mike White as his quarterback. In those games, in 8 games in which he played with those 2 quarterbacks in 2022, was averaging 14.23 fantasy points per game in a half PPR with 11.38 targets per game. Again, those are the kind of numbers that I anticipate to see in terms of the target numbers, but I think the fantasy point total is only going to be significantly higher than that in 2024. Again, when you give him ample opportunity, it's fantastic. And what we saw last season with a new offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, is only going to continue. I mean, he was number 10 amongst all wide receivers last season in terms of total air yards, and he was number 7 amongst all players in terms of red zone targets inside the 10-yard line. And of course, he is going to be the Davante Adams of this team. And what we saw in terms of the last 2 seasons in which Aaron Rodgers had played with guy like Davante Adams. From 2020 to 2021, Davante Adams was averaging 10.96 targets per game and 20.36 fantasy points per game. Within those given seasons, was putting up 280 to 300 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, ranking as a top 3 overall player in fantasy those given years. And not only that, being top 3 in both of those seasons amongst all players in terms of red zone targets. So as long as Aaron Rodgers is going to be healthy, and I understand he's the oldest quarterback in the league, but they've restructured his line and they have weapons for him. And one being Garrett Wilson, who's going to find himself a lot of success in 2024. His most recent healthy season back in 2022, he was the number 1 quarterback in terms of deep passing down the field. Number 1 in terms of attempts, number 5 in terms of completions, number 7 in terms of yards, and number 2 in terms of passing touchdown, 20 or more yards down the field. I really love the idea of, at the back end of my first round, stacking a guy like, Garrett Wilson with Jonathan Taylor's or Jahmyr Gibbs going into this upcoming season, because it really is going to find ourselves a lot of success. Let's move on to the thumbnail of today's episode, DeVonta Smith. I've talked about this in the past via live streams, and I'm going to continue to harp upon the potential of DeVonta Smith in 2024. His current ADP via Sleeper, Yahoo, and ESPN sits at about 48 overall. So if you're able to get him at the back end of the 4th round or potentially the beginning of the 5th round, DeVonta Smith is a steal. Over the course of the last 2 seasons, he is ranked as the number 10 and the number 20 overall wide receiver in fantasy football. And considering going into this upcoming season, they get a new offensive coordinator, these numbers in terms of what he has produced over the course of the last couple seasons should be able to increase. Now, what he's been able to produce over the course of the last 2 years, in games in which he's been given 5 or more receptions, that's happened 25 of the last 37 games he has played. He's averaging 14.45 fantasy points per game. In games in which he played against the NFC East, the division rivals, averaging 15.43 fantasy points per game in the 12 games he has played against them in the last 2 years. Specifically last season, from weeks 1 through 19, averaging 12.11 fantasy points per game on only 7.29 targets per game. When we compare the last 2 seasons of DeVonta Smith's career, 2023 was significantly better in terms of fantasy points per target and fantasy points per reception. So going forward, if he just continues to improve and continues to develop on his deep receiving game, last season was, really good in terms of the deep ball, 20 or more yards down the field, had himself, the 17th most receptions, 16th most yards, and 6th most touchdowns amongst all players in the National Football League within that category, set a career high 15.2 average depth of target last season. If those statistics continue to build, fantastic. But where he is going to find himself a newfound success in 2024 is within the slot position. Last season, he ranked 24th amongst all wide receivers in terms of slot targets, with 39 total targets that led to 30 receptions, 413 yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. Now again, 39 of his total 112 targets last season made 35% of his opportunity come from the slot position. I'm anticipating that number to jump primarily because, like I mentioned earlier, they get a new offensive coordinator, and this is the 3rd in the last 3 years with Kellen Moore joining the organization, a former Chargers offensive coordinator last season and Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator from 2019 to 2022. Most recently, what we have seen from Kellen Moore and his receivers is that he's been able to elevate them to another level, specifically utilizing these players like CeeDee Lamb and Keenan Allen within the slot position, motioning them pre-snap and creating mismatches gives them so much more value. In 2022, 50% of CeeDee Lamb's statistics came from the slot position. In 2023, 45% of Keenan Allen's statistics came from the slot position. Both those guys being incredible fantasy options within those given years because of the presence of someone like Kellen Moore. Now, last season amongst all teams in the National Football League, the Philadelphia Eagles ranked 16th in terms of wide receiver targets. The Chargers last year with Kellen Moore, number 3 amongst all teams, 386 total targets to their wide receivers. And I understand that there is target competition of A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, even the potential of Jahan Dotson. But Jahan Dotson's best season of his entire career was his rookie season, in which he played 74% of his overall snaps out wide. Paris Campbell was cut just yesterday, and there is more potential for DeVonta Smith to be the slot receiving option of the Philadelphia Eagles, an elevated offense, especially when we take into account what they put on the field late last season, which wasn't pretty and is going to be significantly better in 2024. Let's move on to a Kansas City Chief that I can't stop drafting in my 2024 fantasy football leagues. It is Isiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. I think this is plain and simple easy. He is going to be a workhorse back. He is going to be a running back who is able to rank amongst the top 12 at the running back position for the first time in his career. And over the course of the last 5 seasons of fantasy football, we see a lot of running backs, more than wide receivers, able to accomplish that feat. And this is the year for Isiah Pacheco. He is going to be a clear workhorse back that is getting himself a lot of opportunity. Last season, from weeks 1 through 22, averaging 19 touches per game, 13.96 fantasy points per game. In games in which he was given 16 or more touches, he was able to accomplish that in 14 of his 18 games, averaging nearly 16 fantasy points per game. When I talk about unimpeded volume of opportunity, it's associated with teams that don't give their running backs the most overall touches in terms of rushing attempts, that aren't a top 10 rushing offense within the National Football League, but yet they're giving their running back 70+% of overall running back attempts and targets within their offense. Last season, Isiah Pacheco handled 81% of the running back rushing attempts and 53% of the running back targets in healthy games he played within the organization. Now, without Jerick McKinnon within the lineup, there is going to be far more opportunity for targets going in the direction of Isiah Pacheco, which is going to elevate him to being a top 12 fantasy running back and is primarily the reason why I continue to draft him in every draft that I possibly can, because I really do believe he has incredible upside. And my fondness for Isiah Pacheco has only grown over the course of this month. And in the absence of Jerick McKinnon, the confidence grows even more. From weeks 1 through 11 last season, with Jerick McKinnon in the lineup, Isiah Pacheco was averaging 2.9 targets and 2.5 receptions per game for 16.2 receiving yards per game. In the absence of Jerick McKinnon from weeks 12 through 22, we saw Isiah Pacheco averaging 4 targets per game and 3.88 receptions per game, 17.75 receiving yards per game. On a 17-game pace, that's 68 targets, 66 receptions, and over 300 receiving yards. There is a lot of potential for Isiah Pacheco to get himself not only 80+% of the running back rushing attempts within this offense, but 80+% of the targets. And if he's able to get himself all of those targets, that is really going to unlock the potential of him scoring touchdowns within the receiving game, because the Kansas City Chiefs over the course of the last 2 seasons have targeted their running backs a lot in the red zone. In fact, running backs on the Kansas City Chiefs in the last 2 seasons have scored 17 of their 19 receiving touchdowns within the red zone. Amongst all teams in the National Football League over the course of the last 2 seasons, they have been ranked number 7 and number 13 in terms of running back targets with 109 and 112. There is so much upside here, and even though Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Deneric Prince are within this backfield, they're not going to be able to really contribute considering how much of a dominant force Isiah Pacheco is going to be. And considering the Kansas City Chiefs last season disappointed many with their overall offensive contributions, only scoring 37 total offensive touchdowns in terms of passing touchdowns and rushing touchdowns in comparison to the year prior in which they scored 59, if this offense just gets a little bit better and scores 8 more touchdowns and scores a total of 45, which would still be 14 less than the 2022 season. A lot of those could potentially go in the direction of Isiah Pacheco. And considering they brought in guys like Xavier Worthy, of course, Marquise Hollywood Brown, they've addressed offensive needs that are only going to unlock this offense and lead to far more touchdowns for someone like Isiah Pacheco to carry our fantasy teams. Moving on to the next player, Dallas Cowboys tight end Jake Ferguson. Over the course of the last 3 seasons, the Dallas Cowboys have supported a top 10 tight end for fantasy football, half PPR. Dalton Schultz in 2021 and 2022 ranked as the number 9 and the number 3 overall tight end. Most recently, Jake Ferguson, in his first ever season as a starting tight end in the National Football League, ranked as number 8 overall. From weeks 1 through 19, averaged 6.33 targets per game and 9.66 fantasy points per game, but in games in which he was given 7 or more targets, averaging 12.24 fantasy points per game. And I truly do believe that kind of volume of opportunity is on the table, because amongst all players last season, he was just one of 7 tight ends who was able to surpass over 100 targets. Last season, amongst all teams, the Dallas Cowboys were ranked 10th in terms of total tight end targets with 126. So if in fact that number increases and they continue to send the ball in the direction of Jake Ferguson, who has very quickly become one of the favorite targets of Dak Prescott, I do anticipate to see Jake Ferguson, of course, continue to be on the field. I mean, amongst all tight ends last season, ran the 3rd most routes. So if he's on the field every single down, he's running routes all the time. He's I think he ranked 6th amongst all tight ends last year in terms of yards after the catch. Number 2 in terms of missed tackles forced. He is a threat with the ball in his hands. They're going to continue to try to get him implemented. Last season amongst all players, number 5 in terms of targets within the red zone, and was number 13th amongst all players in terms of red zone receiving touchdowns. All while CeeDee Lamb was number 1 in both of those overall categories. If Jake Ferguson just gets a little bit more opportunity, and of course continues to build upon the experience he gained from last season, he is going to be so much better this upcoming year. And Dak Prescott and this offense are going to be in far more negative game scripts, considering they've lost a lot of pieces. They've lost some players to injury. They've lost some players to free agency. Shoot, they even lost their defensive coordinator. There is a lot that this Dallas Cowboys team is missing, and it is going to cause a lot more potential shootouts, which, in my opinion, considering there isn't any additional target competition, his main priority target competition is CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and Jalen Tolbert. And as of right now, Jake Ferguson is the number 2 receiving threat of this offense. And going into this year, in my opinion, for those of you waiting on the tight end position, this is the guy you want on your team 9 times out of 10. Moving on, let's talk about the final group of players that I wanted to talk about. It is rookie wide receivers. I really do find myself drafting a lot of rookie wide receivers in 2024. Now, I mentioned this just a couple days ago in a video that I talked about rookie wide receivers, but the fact that we saw 7 rookie wide receivers selected in the 2024 draft, which tied, I think, the draft back in 2004 for most rookie wide receivers selected within a draft. I mean, that is impressive. And that just kind of goes to show just what kind of talent there potentially is at the wide receiver position and potentially available to us at ADPs that are quite often low. And a lot of these guys are going to rank within the top 36. Now, we already know guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors are going to be in the conversation of the top 36 rankings, but who else should we be targeting? Now, before I get into those specific names, I want to talk about the statistic that really does influence my confidence in drafting a rookie wide receiver. From 2019 to 2023, the last 5 seasons of fantasy football, we have seen 11 of 23 first-round selected wide receivers finish as a top 36 ranked wide receiver within that given season. That's a 48% success rate. But if we exclude injuries in which players played less than 14 games within their rookie year, that makes 10 of the last 13 rookie first-round wide receivers who played full healthy regular seasons. Again, that's a 77% success rate now. Find themselves top 36 standings by the end of the year. These 10 wide receivers averaged 114 targets, 72 receptions, 955 total yards, and 6 total touchdowns for 167 fantasy points on average. Again, a 77% success rate among 7 potential first-round wide receivers selected this year is a 5.39 potential. So let's say 5 of these wide receivers that were selected within the first round make it within the top 36 rankings, which honestly, that's pretty much what the statistics kind of lead us in the direction of. If we assume that, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors are going to accomplish that, that leaves us with Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, Xavier Legette, and Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall is already dealing with a shoulder injury and has been dealing with an injury all offseason, and he has unbelievable target competition with Kittle, McCaffrey, Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. So he's pretty much out of the conversation. Then we have Xavier Legette, who, even though many people are forgetting about the Carolina Panthers, oftentimes I find myself drafting him in the later rounds, mainly because Dave Canales, the head coach and the primary play caller of this offense in 2022 and 2023, in both the offenses he was associated with, he was able to support 2 top 30 wide receivers in both those years. If in fact he's able to do it again, it would be Deontay Johnson along with Xavier Legette. I'd say it's a non-zero chance that this happens, which again, if you want to take the shot in the dark for it, I don't mind. But the 3 receivers that I feel very confident with is Xavier Worthy, which is a explosive playmaker, the fastest 40-yard dash time in NFL Combine history. He's going to make plays 20 or more yards down the field and, of course, expand the offense to finally being a deep threat, unlike they have been over the course of the last 2 years in the absence of Tyreek Hill. And, of course, he's going to find himself a lot of work within the screen game. And, of course, as long as Marquise Hollywood-Brown is out with injury, they just cut Kadarius Toney, there is more and more opportunity for someone like Xavier Worthy to not only start week 1, but be an immediate contributor every single week. Brian Thomas Jr., the next Calvin Ridley of that offense, is going to find himself a lot of success. We talked about it in terms of sleeper just a couple days ago. And then we have Rome Odunze, who every time Caleb Williams goes off script is looking in the direction of Rome Odunze, his favorite target potentially going into this year. Very much so a kind of dark horse to take over that offense. DJ Moore's the number 1, but I expect to see Rome Odunze be the number 2. So if, in fact, you find yourself in a position where you can draft a rookie wide receiver this year, especially one that was selected within the first round, do yourself a favor and draft them. I really do believe it is going to lead to success. All right, guys, those are going to cover my favorite picks going into the 2024 fantasy football season. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed today's content, be sure to go ahead, click the like button down below, and, of course, subscribe. We're making daily fantasy football content. We, of course, have the 2024 fantasy football draft guide and rankings, all of this kind of content extra from the channel via Patreon or Underdog Fantasy. Check that out if you're interested. But that's going to cover for me today. I'll be back tomorrow with full PPR rankings amongst my top 50 running backs going into this weekend for those of you drafting. So get ready for that. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.